Okay, hi everybody, and thank you so much for coming to our webinar today. My name is Amelia Kim. I am the Lifelong Learning Librarian at the Montana State Library, and today our webinar is Montana Legal Overview and Resources with the State Law Library, and we are honored to have the State Law Librarian himself, Franklin, here with us today. Before I pass things over to Franklin, though, just a few housekeeping things to start with. You are welcome to add in any comments or questions that you have during Franklin's presentation. You can use the chat box. We're also a pretty small group today, so if you're comfortable with unmuting, you are welcome to do that, but I will be monitoring the chat so you can add in any comments or questions there. For those of you who are attending live, we do have OPI credit available. You can contact Colette Bartow, her email is listed on the slide, and get that set up. OPI credit is available for any of our trainings if you attend live, and for any of our trainings, you just contact Colette and she will get you set up. And as you probably were notified by Zoom, this is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube, so you can access it there later on if you would like. And then a few quick announcements before I hand things over to Franklin. In case you didn't know, we have a couple of new trunks available through the MSL trunk program. So the SEAL STEM trunks are available, and SEAL stands for Solar Eclipse Activities for Libraries. We have 2 solar eclipses coming up in North America, one in October and one in April. And although we're not in the path of totality, it's still going to look pretty cool. So these SEAL STEM trunks are meant to help educate your patrons about how solar eclipses work and help them appreciate those upcoming eclipses. We're having another tech cohort, this time on Microsoft Excel. So that is happening from July 24th to September 29th. You can check that out in Aspen and in MSL Learn if you would like more details. There is a youth services overview course in MSL Learn that is entirely self-paced. It's great for if you have a new youth services person or perhaps a dedicated volunteer or even trustees. That is available for anyone to enroll. ARP has reached out to us about caregiving programs. They have a caregiving consultant who is willing to travel and do presentations in person or virtually at your library on a variety of caregiving topics. So if that's something that's of interest, please let me know and I'm happy to connect you with her. And then lastly, we have a lot of ready-to-read brochures available for our public libraries. So we did a redesign last year and then we just did a reprint with our new logo and updated information. So if you would like some of those to hand out to your patrons, please let me know and I'm happy to put together a package. If you have any questions about any of this, please let me know and we can chat further. But I will go ahead and turn things over to Franklin. Franklin, thanks so much for agreeing to do this. And yeah, thanks for being here.
I want to say thank you for inviting me to this program. I want to thank the Montana State Library for this opportunity to speak with everyone, the people who are here live, but also sort of in perpetuity on YouTube. One of the things I also want to sort of say, I love Amelia, I love your department sort of title of this lifelong learning, because that's I before even meeting you or knowing of your department, I use that phrase weekly to describe sort of the journey that any good sort of lawyer or law librarian is on. It's an industry that requires you to be a lifelong learner. I am forever being sort of pushed and challenged by sort of changes in technology or changing needs of our patrons in really interesting ways. And so I'm excited to be a part of this program because I'm a lifelong learner and I'm really proud and excited about that. So I'll just sort of start with that. I'm going to just say a quick brief words about sort of who I am and why I'm here and why that might matter. So I'm the state law librarian for Montana, and I've had this position for not very long. So I've been here since January, and I'm really excited to be here, and it's given me a really kind of wonderful change in perspective and how I view legal services and legal information, and sort of changing. I was previously in an academic environment where I sort of was a research librarian and reference librarian and teacher and all of those things for years. And prior to that, for 11 years, I was in academia. And prior to that, I was a practitioner in Boston that focused on civil matters, sort of large scale litigation involving suing tobacco companies or suing automotive manufacturers for having unsafe seatbelts. So that's sort of my background of where, my professional background of learning and then sort of entering librarianship as sort of the second part of my career and the excitement that I've had around it. And I am excited to speak with you all today. I am someone who's very used to seeing hands fly up with a lot of questions. And so please, if there are moments, for those of you that are here live, if there are moments where I am unclear about a topic or a foundational sort of moment, I want you to just raise your hand and say, we have no idea what you're talking about. And that will allow me to sort of shift to make sure that we're all on this journey together. Another thing, so that's sort of where I'll kind of begin. I have a couple of points I want to talk to you about the State Law Library and our services and what we do here. And I also want to then sort of really think most about how public libraries in Montana should be aware of and using the State Law Library, for the advantage of your staff and in particular your patrons, and how we can provide assistance for people across the state, people in all sorts of situations and matters. And I also want to recognize that I have a sense that you all, public librarians, are on the front lines of a lot of legal questions from your patrons that are very vexing and difficult. And so I want to kind of talk about your role as a librarian in the face of very difficult situations and difficult patrons. One thing to sort of know is that I tend to avoid, however possible, I avoid using PowerPoint presentations. So I have a handout that I'm going to drop into the chat. And it is also, I provided it previously with, and it might already be attached to the web announcement of this event. But I did sort of, oh wait, let me send this to everybody. Hold on 1 second. Just so that if you would like to follow along with the information, and there's a chart in here and some additional information. So I've dropped the handout that I'm going to use into the chat. All right. What I want to cover today includes sort of what services we offer. I would like to describe how I understand and then categorize legal issues into the sort of different branches of government and into our structure. So I want to give this sort of very elementary vision of when I'm confronted with a legal issue, the first job is always in a reference interview to listen, right? And actively listen and get information. But my sort of first maneuver is to listen for clues and think about, what does this legal issue relate to? What sort of branches of government are engaged in this? And then that gives me clues on where to find additional information that can be useful. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Montana Code Annotated, or the MCA. And this is the code, this is the Montana Code of Statutes that governs, our sort of operating procedure in life. as a citizen, as a business, as a government entity, whatever you are, the Montana Code Annotated is the legislation that guides sort of our behavior and norms. And a lot of times when people say, well, what's the law on this? If a patron's like, well, I need to see the law on one, that's kind of a confusing, it can be a very hard question to answer, because our law is made up from a lot of different sort of sources coming together, and different traditions that come together. And so, but I did at least want to focus on sort of being able to show someone a statute book and being able to understand what's going on with it. And then the other thing that I wanted to briefly spend some time on is what is called the access to justice movement. We think about how libraries have changed over the decades. One of the things that the Montana Library did in the sort of dawn of the internet age, the Montana State Law Library made some decisions early to put in place programs that are designed to help people navigate very difficult, conflicted situations within the court. And there was this realization that the law library is going to need to figure out its mission and adjust to be more inclusive into who the law library serves. It was really kind of, if we kind of look at very early law library situations, you have really the service of lawyers who needed to come to law libraries to use all of the print resources, and judges. And as the sort of has so much information and legal information is going online, we still work with a lot of lawyers, mainly via email and calls, but we needed to sort of adjust to create a body of knowledge for citizens who are representing themselves in difficult legal situations. A lot of times because they can't afford an attorney, or they're not the type of case that maybe will be taken on by a help agency or something like that. So that's something I want to kind of talk to you all about, is what does our self-help look like? All right. I am going to share my screen and just sort of share the handout that I'm using. I'm going to, maybe flip between the handout and our web page is sort of my goal on this. So when I'm looking at, one of the things I want to kind of talk about is, what does the law library with respect to our kind of outreach services is an interesting sort of thing for me to sort of think about. And this gets to this part here where it says, it is hard to get Montana citizenry excited about their legal problems. And my point here is that, like, when I go out into the community and try and meet with individuals and sort of, people tend to come to the law library when they're having a very bad experience. If it is a pro se patron, or if it's a patron who's representing themselves, if it is a patron who has sort of found themselves caught in a legal matter, whether that be criminal or civil, I'm usually they will appear on our doorstep or call us or email us and ask us for issues. So it's just interesting thinking about outreach from the perspective of a law library, because it's, a lot of times we're helping people with getting a divorce, or navigating child custody issues, or when a parent dies and we have to talk to some people about the probate process. So it's always sort of interesting to think about what our outreach looks like, because when we go out, we basically are like, well, what kind of problems do you have? What kind of legal issues are you facing? One of the things that I want to, definitely impress upon the people in this meeting and people who might watch it is, I think that when your staff, your sort of circulation or access or reference staff is engaged by a patron with legal issues or legal questions, I want you to be very comfortable in referring them to our offices and to our department. It might be right away. I think that I think it's important to listen to people and try and get a grasp of what their question is. But if you're feeling as if you are being asked a lot of complicated legal issues, you're not alone. There is, our department exists for a reason, and we're very happy to help. We're definitely very happy to help libraries navigate these difficult questions. And so one of the things that I think about is making sure that when you are not only your staff, but when you're training staff, to sort of have a little part where you talk about law libraries and in our law library and what we can do for the citizens of Montana. I think that that would be really important and probably very productive. I was at the Montana Library Association annual meeting, and I was listening to one person kind of tell me about how a patron needed help with a document, very kind of frequent or common thing, and I need this document. And the librarian indicated how they helped this person type out this sort of legal letter that was in essence a demand letter or sort of threatening a lawsuit. And I was really concerned. One is, you definitely as a librarian should not be going to this extra level of, in essence, providing legal, you're getting close to a line there of between legal information, which is what I'm allowed to provide, versus legal advice. And I just caution people of when you get too involved in someone's legal matter or helping them draft something, there's certain responsibilities that could come along with that that are unintended on the part of the librarian, but could be very serious, not only for the person, but also for the library, if there is some determination that were you engaged in providing legal advice and or the unauthorized practice of law. So one of the things is to sort of think about that issue and think about the questions and think about how deeply you are ready to assist someone. Because there's some certain pitfalls that, that librarians, we want to help people. We want to kind of help with, crafting documents or helping people understand how to navigate information. But there is this sort of difficult moment when you get to legal information that can cross a line into providing, in essence, providing legal services to someone when you're not authorized to do that. And I'm particularly not authorized to do that as I'm an employee of the judicial branch, right? And so if I were to start offering legal advice and providing sort of representation to people, would be wholly inappropriate and just totally out of line. So, all right. The next point that I want to kind of talk about on this handout is thinking about when it comes to legal research, your staff and your patrons' suffering is optional. And this gets to this sort of idea of remembering that we're here. And a lot of times I think if you're spending more than 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes looking for legal information, and if you're drawing a blank or you have no idea what's going on, contact us. You can call us and put us on the phone with the patron. Our hours are 8 to 5 every day. So if it's an evening time event, you might need to sort of have them call us the next day. But if, as I say, I think that your time as a librarian is valuable. It is valuable because you're an information professional and you have a lot on your plate, and you all are doing incredible work in your communities. And so I don't want you to, oh, I'm
Real quick,
sorry.
Franklin, there's a question from Pam. If library staff provides some legal advice, is that person or the library accountable? Most libraries train staff in the "I'm not a lawyer" guidelines.
Okay, so let me look. Is the library staff provide some legal advice? Is that person or the library accountable?
If they, and I'll kind of clarify, is it if they give some bad advice or something turns out wrong, would that individual person who perhaps gave some bad advice be kind of accountable for that, or would it come to the library because it was library staff? That's all I'm wondering. And I think most places do say, we're not lawyers, so we're just giving you some advice. But I could also see how some of the smaller libraries might not even think about that, and they'll just do what they think how things should be, and they may or may not be right. So I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, and that's a great question about whether, if is sort of some level of malfeasance occurred, whether that's individually or associated with the organization. I would like to say that this would be so rare to occur. And so, I don't want us to sort of spend all of our time thinking about these incidents that probably will never happen. But I do think that this is an important point. So it does deserve some unpacking. Probably what would happen is if a library was sued for this, I would imagine that the plaintiff would name both the employee and the library. I don't know for sure, but I assume, and the library could argue, no, it's not us, or there might be some organizational aspect where the plaintiff is saying, look at how poor their training was. I don't know. We're now kind of making up a whole case, but I would say that the key is not only saying, that you're not a lawyer, you're saying I can give you some legal information, but I can't interpret it for you. I can't suggest a best course of action for you. All I can do is provide for you information and then provide referrals to other places, not only the State Law Library, but it might be a situation where you refer to them to the Montana Legal Services website, which has a lot of information on domestic violence or landlord-tenant law, or so there's, providing information and referrals, of course, but sort of giving legal advice. I think that one is, I always say, I'm not your lawyer. I'm only going to provide for you information, and you need to engage with the material to determine the best course, or hire a lawyer to be able to tell you. And if you can't, I'm sorry you can't, right? But it is really kind of important to navigate that line. So I want to go back to my point about your staff and your patron, remembering that your time is important. And after 10 or 15 minutes, if you can't even understand what's going on, or if you can't find kind of what they're looking for, as I say, your time is valuable. We're legal information experts. Punt it to us. Send the request our way. We're always happy to try and help out. Our kind of goal is we're going to try and engage, educate, and empower citizens, and also engage, educate, and empower the sort of Montana legal community as well. So, through our services, we provide, not only, we're open to the public, so that should be, kind of clear. We're in Helena, so that I know that's very limiting in a very large state like this. But so open to the public with public computers, and we provide, at our computers, we provide access to incredibly powerful and, legal databases like Westlaw and Lexis, in the legal databases, which might not be, which one are really rare to find out in public libraries. I can think of like one public library that would offer Lexis. And of course, there's the law library at the University of Montana, which also the Jameson or the Jameson Law Library in Missoula, which provides really good access to a lot of legal information and has a great team there. All right. Other things that we do include, document delivery. When people need help with either forms or copies of things, we're happy to mail that to individual or email it to individuals. We provide interlibrary loan, and we provide training sessions for staff. So if you would like someone to come to or visit your library via Zoom or in person to talk about how to navigate these questions, someone on our staff is always happy to provide a training for library teams. We're also happy to come out and talk with patrons. If you wanted to have an event in which different legal information is shown, we're happy to appear and do the best we can, given logistics, right? We also, the one thing that we get asked a lot, particularly when the legislature is in session, is the law library has a pretty extensive collection of legislative histories. So the sort of what goes into making a statute, what the meetings look like, what the intent was behind different statutes. And so that's something that we work a lot on, and we receive a lot of requests for. Finally, I would just sort of mention again our sort of access to expensive legal databases and also free legal databases, but we're providing it for citizens to access. And if people are far away, they can kind of work with a librarian to ask questions, and we can use the databases to find additional information and send it to patrons as well. All right, so I'm going to sort of stop there for a moment. And I've talked a little bit about what the library offers as far as services. And we kind of touched on the pitfalls and problems that can occur when that happens. Are there any sort of follow-up questions at this time?
Franklin, so you mentioned just calling the State Law Library if you're with a patron or something like that. Is there an email for a reference library? I mean, I know a few of the staff members at the State Law Library, but I'm not sure who actually is in charge of like the reference services and who would be most appropriate to contact.
So if you look on the handout, I'll screen share again. The handout has that information up at the top. And it not only do I indicate my personal email and direct line, but also here's our reference email, the MT Law Library, and the main line there. That is primarily, a lot of the reference is navigated by our reference librarian, Shane Cashin, but I also sort of engage, and also there are a number of our team members. We have Sonia Gavin, who was the former librarian at the legislature, and her depth of knowledge is so stunning and amazing on so many fronts. And so we have other members of our team who can kind of contribute, and we sort of figure out who's going to be best at answering which question and do our best to navigate that away.
Okay, perfect. So that MT Law
helps.
Library email is probably best.
Yeah, or as I say, sometimes it's also really easy to just pick up the phone or have someone call us. And if we can't help them right away, we can get their information, and we usually get back to them within a business day for sure. So trying to navigate that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Most of my legal questions actually are at the library are not usually from patrons. They're actually ones that come up for the library itself. So like the board might want to do something and I'm not sure if we can do that, or, um, like for an example, I wanted to know what legally, how long we could take a loan for if we, wanted to buy land, for example. And so finding that information is sometimes difficult. Is that the kind of questions we could call you about?
There you're asking for, in essence, a legal conclusion. And so I would not answer that question. I could provide you information that might provide insight into how you can navigate that. But when a library is facing a legal question, a lot of times, and this gets to a complicated issue of how Montana libraries are sort of arranged in their structure. If you're facing a legal question, as I would ask your commissioner board if, well,
Can I tell you why it's difficult for us? Because we're a district library, so we don't have, we don't have access to county, legal. I mean, I've tried. I mean, they'll sometimes answer the chair when she asks a question. They never answer my questions. And then when we've tried contacting private lawyers, we've gotten incorrect information from them because they don't understand. We had like somebody that we asked locally, and honestly, they just don't. The law is rather complex when it comes to libraries, especially district libraries. I think maybe I just think that just because I work at a district library, just because there's a lot of different statutes. It's not just the public library statutes for districts, but then we're also in the government parts, and so you have to know all the different parts of the statute. And so she gave us incorrect information, for example.
Yeah. My initial point is that I would have to read a little bit more about what that district library structure looks like, and maybe we can talk a little bit more after today's presentation. And you have my contact information. We can kind of set up a call. Now, I know if I were to have a legal question, I can turn to state resources, right? There's the Department of Administration or the Department of Justice also has teams of lawyers that work for sort of state agencies. I don't think I could turn to them actually, because I am not, I would be part of the judicial branch. I would have to look internally to see where I could turn to for an actual legal opinion about what we're either allowed to do or not to do. But I also understand that if you're not part of the state, if you're part of a district, that your sort of vision of what the structure is above you might be cloudy. You might not really grasp. And I would say that I offhand don't know either at this point. Like, I just am unfamiliar with what that looks like. You might have to see what your budget provides for. You might have to, it might also be worth contacting the Montana State Library to see what resources they provide. Provide libraries as far as access to that. But offhand, I'm sorry, I just don't know where you could turn.
So another question I have, for example, there was a lot of libraries make a policy on their community rooms based on some case law that happened at least 10 years ago. And I'm always curious to know if there was any additional case law in the United States about the use of public library meeting rooms. And I wouldn't know where to start. Is that a kind of question you would answer?
Let's look at, let's actually look at I'm going to share my screen again. And I am going to, we're looking at the handout, and let's get to the last page of the handout. And this is I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot. So this is a sort of vision of three, we can kind of think of it like rows and columns, like an Excel spreadsheet, and your columns are jurisdictions. Up at the top, we can see a federal, we can see the state, the middle one is Montana. And as I use just an example of another state, I did Massachusetts as another state, just to show that if this chart was, actually correct, I would have a lot more sort of columns about how the law interacts with each other, because every state is going to have its own vision, is going to have its own sort of set of hierarchy. And so what I normally do, so when your question is, libraries have policies involving public meeting rooms. At some point, there were decisions made, or maybe it's one, or maybe it's multiple cases, came down with some rule about public library meeting rooms. And your question is, hey, has that changed over time? Are there new sort of aspects to think about? The first kind of question that I would have is, do you have any information about that case? Was the case federal? Was it in a different state? Was it in Montana? So that's where I would start thinking. Do you have any information? If you can't remember, that's totally okay.
I don't have any information.
Yeah.
It was just like talked about in public library literature and amongst each other, that everybody sort of switched their policies and allowed like religious services to happen in their meeting room, that you couldn't have anything based on content. And I just thought to myself, isn't that strange that like this happened over 10 years ago and we never hear anything about it again? Maybe nothing did happen since then, but I just always wondered about it. It was just a curiosity.
I know, I love this. I love this question. I love this question because you're hinting at a couple of things. One of the things to sort of start, I want to kind of contextualize our question of it sounds like if this was made, if this was sort of bandied about the library, water cooler, so to speak, of like, oh, this happened, we all have to sort of change. My first question was, that clues me in that maybe it was a federal court that made this decision. That's unclear to me, but maybe, let's say that the state of Massachusetts court made some rule. Well, big deal. Well, I mean, good for the people of Massachusetts to understand that, but you have to realize that there are silos with respect to, of how the law operates. And so if the Massachusetts general laws, if their legislature was like, this is what we expect out of library community rooms, well, okay, great, Massachusetts, but it ends at those boundaries. So now the other thing that we have to think about is, so let's say that it is a federal matter. There are federal laws, there's the statutes that we would have to consider. There are federal regulations that we might have to consider. The Supreme Court might have issued a ruling about that, at which point that gives you some nationwide guidance. But then if we're looking at this chart and we look at the sort of circuit court and district courts, well, if the First Circuit Court of Appeals that sits in Boston, if is part of a circuit, so it covers a couple of states, I'm gonna get it wrong, maybe Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Puerto Rico. If the First Circuit issued that decision, well, it would be binding in that circuit. it would not be binding in Montana because it's a federal matter that has been resolved in the First Circuit. Now, if the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is where the western sort of portion of America is located in the Ninth Circuit, if they issued that order, well, then we might actually need to pay attention in Montana, because they're sort of making a proclamation about a federal civil right that could be applicable, but but once again, that's true for that circuit. So we would really need to think about, I feel like we just went from very foundational to very advanced quickly. So I apologize for all of you all listening, but one of the things to think about of our federal system, federalism, is this connection between states and the federal government. And this case might have been issued in a state, at which point it's good in that state. It could have been issued federally, but then we'd have to understand where it was issued federally to understand how it connects with what we're doing. I'm going to stop there for 1 second because I have a lot more to say about this issue, but I'm interested in how much of this is like making sense or totally lost.
It's making sense, but I'm still confused by this chart. So it's United States Code, then Code of Federations, and then Supreme Court. So all those apply to any of us, and then the Ninth Circuit, and then the U.S. District Court of Montana, and then it goes over to the Constitution of Montana. Is that right?
Well, it's interesting is that in a way you kind of read down the chart correctly, in the sense that in the federal, we kind of start at the top with this idea that the Constitution and then the code, and the courts are not allowed to just make up a law. They're not allowed to, leapfrog what the legislature has done. But of course, they have the power to say if a law is unconstitutional, and that's where they're able to kind of leapfrog forward. But you're right to we have to think of the Constitution, the Code of Federal Regulations, and then we kind of get down to sort of the judicial branch and how it makes decisions. And we think of the federal one sort of as its own silo, and think of the Montana one in essence as its own silo as well. And so it's its own sort of realm, but there are moments in time in which it gets fuzzy. I'll admit it really does, particularly when we think of the Constitution of the United States and how it reacts to state issues. But think of, I kind of wish that I had made a space between the federal and the state, because there are sort of hard lines in certain ways that federalism creates, and federalism also creates relationships between them as well. With respect to your problem, Denise, this idea of, well, we would need to, our first research assignment would be to look at where this case actually came from. What court issued it, or was it ever actually made a statute by someone? So that's where we would begin. And then when we found where the case came from, we could then begin to understand whether it affects Montana or not. So I guess my point is that when we look at this legal information, this chart helps me understand, oh, well, the case came from, and we could say, let's pretend that it came from the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Well, I'm going to put it in that column. Well, that column at that point can't spill over into Montana. And it really can't spill over into the federal land as well. So that's my point is thinking about, well, where on earth does this nugget of law come from? Nugget or case or statute or whatever it is, where does it come from? And then I kind of think about this chart, and then that tells me about how applicable it is to citizens of Montana, or citizens of us as our federal citizenship. those sorts of things that are what I would look at and try and understand.
So where would you start? Like what research would you go to?
I would start probably with the library literature to even see where this was even brought up with 10 years ago. I would start 10 years ago and look at library journals to see what was the conversation. And then I would hope that they would, in a newspaper or magazine article, list, what I would call a primary source, i.e. a source of law. And then I would then, once I got that nugget of like, oh, well, what case is she talking about? Or what regulation is she talking about? Once I found the actual source of law, or this sort of the genesis of your problem, then everything really opens up. Once you can find that case, or you can find that statute, your ability to really expand your resource or your research really grows quickly, because of the way that our legal system has been built, in essence, as, well, one, we're lucky to live in a society in which, that people can build very powerful databases that connect basically all cases back through, American history. We can, make ties from cases from the 1820s to the 1920s to the 2020s, because the databases will make those connections for us. And not only do they make connections going backwards, they make connections moving forward in time. And that's the part that's really interesting about sort of legal information, is once we find that nugget, once we find that initial sort of starting point, our legal databases allow us to see, well, are there any articles that have talked about that case? Are there any additional cases? And this gets to exactly your point. This gets exactly to your point of like, well, what has happened since? There's something in legal scholarship that's called a citator. And what it does is it takes, whenever legal information is created, it's given, in essence, an official legal citation. I would think of it almost like a social security number for information. So when legal documents are created, they're given this sort of numbering system that's sort of affixed to them forever. And the legal databases know that. And then when anything moving forward in time talks about what occurred 10 years ago, a little blip in the machine occurs. And so that you will always know it. You'll always have a sense that, oh, there was this case that really changed the way libraries behave. Oh, well, we can look at that case and see, well, 7 years later, it was criticized in 3 different jurisdictions. And then 9 years later, we can see that it was supported by 2 jurisdictions. So it's really able to sort of track sort of what's going on. All right. And I noticed in the chat, you mentioned that we have these sort of cases. And what's interesting about these cases is that we see that one is out of Illinois and one is out of Pennsylvania, both of them out of federal courts, and both of them sort of locked in their jurisdiction. So we would go and look at those cases and sort of see, well, what's occurred with them previously? Did another jurisdiction or did a higher court ever review what these cases did? So I love that you were able to, good work on finding these cases quickly and having, a citation for them. But these are some federal cases that are trial court cases. And it's interesting that, everybody decided to change their behavior based on these. And maybe they just felt it was good policy. Maybe they didn't, but it does look like, and we would have to research this more to see if it was adopted at a higher level by higher courts or adopted by statute somewhere. But it is interesting that you have 2 trial court cases, and one in Pennsylvania, one in Illinois, and to believe that that sort of holds sway over other jurisdictions, that it would be an interesting argument to sort of say that, like, oh, this 2001 case that occurred in the Northern District of Illinois, and their interpretation of it, well, that really sticks with it's hard for them to sort of issue a controlling argument about really what other jurisdictions are allowed to do or not allowed to do. So, yeah, but I love this question because, well, maybe we need to follow up. We need to do more research and see kind of how these have played out over time, and what other jurisdictions have thought about them. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. I felt that that was a really kind of a crash course in hierarchy of authority and in jurisdictions. And so I am so thankful, Denise, that you jumped on that issue and made us kind of bring it up. But I feel as if I'm not like, I kind of want to be like Sully landing the plane in the Hudson. And I feel like I might have just crashed the plane in the Hudson instead. Unclear. But I love that you brought this up. And I recognize also that we're kind of running short on time. And there were just a few things that I did want to mention before I jumped off. But before I kind of make these concluding remarks, does anybody else have a question?
There is nothing in the chat beyond Denise adding the potential cases. And I appreciate you taking us through. I mean, I don't think Denise would have reached out to me to ask this question, but if she had, I would not have known where to start. So this was an interesting look at an area of research that I haven't really done much before. And it's good to know about.
Well, thanks. And the best part about it for me is that, like, the more I learn about it, the more I'm mystified as well. So, like, it's a really fascinating how our country is put together and how it allegedly works sometimes or doesn't work, or how they relate to one another. I consider it like a series of really bad sort of relationships between the states and the federal government. There are definitely honeymoon periods where everybody's getting along, but there are also sort of moments of really harsh moments between the different political bodies within our country, which is always interesting, as anybody who reads the news can kind of talk about. So one of the things that I do want to indicate to you all, as far as resources that I think are fantastic, and I'm right now at the Judicial Branch's website, which is courts.mt.gov. And, I'll highlight that the library has its own tab here with information that we provide, which is going to be great. But I also want to indicate to you all the two additional things, which gets into this vision of our access to justice initiatives. And one is the self-help. And here are these various locations in Montana that are staffed by our sort of self-help workers. And there is a sort of a director, and these are usually going to be, not all, but many of them are AmeriCorps volunteers that are trained on understanding how to help individuals navigate kind of some basic legal issues. A lot of it involves parenting plans, divorces, those sorts of matters. But this is, you have about the program here. So this is someplace that after I kind of help individuals, I also mention our self-help program and direct people to self-help, so that they can have someone to ask questions of. A lot of the questions are, did I fill out this form correctly? You know, how do I serve this on the other party? There's certain things that they're really good about assisting. The other point that I want to kind of bring up is our forms section. The help topics on these forms are divided up alphabetically. And, you know, the really popular one, of, hey, I need to try and get a divorce. And so we kind of have a whole packet of information and instructions on, oh, I have a dissolution, there are no children, and we're actually going to work together. And so joint dissolution without children right here. So I can click on this, and this allows me to download, a packet of information that the person can follow. Oh, I mean, the hardest part frequently for the librarian is knowing exactly what's going on. Like, wait, so, you don't have children, you do have children, you can work together, you're not working together. But this forms page has been incredibly, a thing that we're frequently asked is name change issues. And so helping individuals with name changes, step parent adoptions. That's another thing that, is sort of frequent. So we have a lot of information also on landlord tenant issues as well. And sort of not only are there forms associated in handbooks and guidebooks on duties, but we also have additional overview and resources that can direct people to sort of understand their problem at a deeper level. Okay. I, at this point, have sort of ended up, I've taken, this was a very quick hour in a wonderful way. You all had wonderful questions and a lot going on. The handout includes, as I say, contact information that we'd love to have you all, reach out to us about. So with that, I mean, I'll stay on the call afterwards, but with that, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. Amelia, do you have any closing words?
No, just thank you, Franklin, for this great information. I feel like medical stuff and law stuff always makes people who aren't in those professions go a little like, oh, so it's always nice to know where to reach out to for more information. And for those of you who are watching the recording or attended this live, I will be putting the handout that Franklin gave us in the Aspen event listing. I'll upload the PDF there so you can download it and access it there. But yeah, thank you so much, Franklin, for agreeing to do this. I'll go ahead and stop the recording here.